Hi everyone, welcome to the Oxford Policy Podcast. This is Marc and Cristian, MPP student here at the Blavatnik School of Government, and today we are very honored to be joined by Margrethe Vestager. Margrethe Vestager is former Executive Vice President of the Commission for Europe Fit for Digital Age. She served before as a European Commissioner for Competition and had roles in the Danish government as Minister for Education and then Minister for Economic and Interiors Affairs. She's now a World Leader Fellow at the Blavatnik School of Government and have plenty of other activities that she will be able to share with us. So Margrethe, thank you very much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
You served as European Commissioner for Competition and then Executive Vice President, and you had really a big role in shaping how Europe deals with big techs, both in terms of enforcement of competition law, but also in creating new regulations such as the Digital Market Acts. There is three major cases against Google that are often quoted as an illustration of the enforcement of competition law in Europe. So can you walk us through these three major cases that totaled an amount of 8 billion euros, which is completely unprecedented? And does this kind of enforcement really reshape behavior markets in Europe?
So the first Google case was a case where we thought that Google was promoting their own shopping comparison service. You know, this is a service that allows you to see what is the price of this product I want to buy. Is it in the storage? How fast can it be sent to me? All kind of, good quality data that you can compare. But there existed a number of different services providing that to you. But Google, they promoted their own service and they demoted all the competitors to page 4 in your search results. So you'd never find them. So we brought this case against them and we fined them quite heftily. And before I left the commission, we won that case in court. Second case was a case about the Android operating system. And here it was a sort of what you would say is the out-of-the-box experience. A lot of people, they like the out-of-the-box experience that you can take out your phone and poof, it's just working. But it's not something poof. There's a lot of money behind that. So we found that Google had paid phone manufacturers for making sure that the experience that you get is a Google experience, which means that most people actually, they don't go looking for another search engine or another browser. And the third Google case was called the AdSense case, and that was about advertising. The problem of the three cases was not that they were well done, efficiently done, with hefty fines and with good results in court. It was that the market didn't come back. So what we saw was very little change in the marketplace. Some of the complainants in the Google case on the shopping comparison actually went bankrupt between the complaint and the final decision. So we found that no matter how well you do it with the individual competition cases, there is a speed asymmetry. You can destroy the market way, way faster than we can get you. And because of that, we needed to think of something else.
Okay. And there is also the 13 billion case against Apple. It is quite different because it was about tax collection in Ireland. It was ruled by the CJEU just after, I think, you left the European Commission, if I'm not mistaken.
Actually, it was just before.
Okay.
And so in Europe, we have this prohibition that the state cannot give something to some company that other companies cannot have. And we had found that the Irish state had allowed Apple not to pay 13 billion euros in taxes. And we thought that's a clear breach of saying, no, you cannot give something to one company that others cannot have. And we had lost in the first instance, so at the General Court. We had appealed that with great efforts, actually. And then in September, we are waiting for the judgment from the ECJ, the European Court of Justice. And everybody had told me, you're going to lose this. And I was like, how can we lose this? It's an obvious case. They had put all of their profits in a company with no offices, no employees, no coffee machine, no nothing, and also not taxable anywhere. It must be possible. But everybody was so insistent that they say, you're going to lose that. And I said, okay, if we're going to lose that, I'm going to own that as well, as if it was a win. So I want to go into the press room. I want to have a speech to tell why this happened and what else we've done. So we had this loser speech. And then we were sitting in my office, and every Wednesday at 9:30, the court comes out with its rulings. So you can turn on your phone. You can do that on a Wednesday, and you can see, well, what are the rulings of the European Court of Justice? And I was like, oh my God, do we have to listen to this? So I said to one of my people, maybe go out of the room, come back, tell us calmly what has happened. And then he came in like 30 seconds later, tumbling through the doors. I think we won.
Oh.
So we did win the case. And we had, of course, to turn the speech around in 30 minutes in order to make it the winner's speech instead. So Apple had to pay back not 13, but 14 billion euros to the Irish state because in the meantime, interest rates had come on. And for me, this was really important because I think a lot of tax evasion is still ongoing. But on that Wednesday, we showed all the people who pay their taxes that not even the biggest companies on this planet can choose whether they want to pay taxes or not.
And of course, these decisions, they brought a lot of reactions in Europe, but also across the ocean in the US. And recently, Donald Trump threatened to retaliate and sanction the European Union if there is still fines or regulation against big tech companies that are most of the time American. So how do you think Europe can answer this risk of retaliation? We saw that US is already implementing sanctions, but at the individual level, with 5 major European figures being sanctioned. Among them, there was a French commissioner, Thierry Breton. So can the EU really have a cohesive answer to this kind of threats, given that we are dependent on military capabilities, but also in many economic sectors?
In my view, you have very little choice. Because if you stop enforcing your own laws because of external pressure, you're done. You have lost your legitimacy. You have lost the reason why people should, be active in their democracy, to elect politicians, to pass laws that law enforcers will enforce and that courts will put their judgments upon. So I think it's really important to continue. And also to say, well, we need to discuss the same things. We cannot discuss competition law enforcement and trade tariffs at the same time. It doesn't make any sense. If we talk trade, we talk trade. If we talk competition law enforcement, we talk competition law enforcement. When we talk defense, we talk defense. Because if you mix it all in one big bucket, everything becomes completely opaque and it becomes very difficult to navigate. And the last thing is that actually at this point in time, both Europeans have the expectation that the laws that we have will be enforced, for instance, so that digital services will be safe to use for your mental health, that businesses have a fair chance to get to the market, but also that there is a sense of, we want to do this. We will not be coerced, and we will not, just because we're threatened, just fold and say, oh, we'd never do it again.
Yeah. Staying on this topic of coercion, last year there was a major trade deal between the US and the EU that was asymmetrically in the favor of the US. So the EU exports had 15% tariff and the US imports had 0% tariffs. A lot of people say that this decision was strategically took because of the war in Ukraine and the US involvement there. But what do you think as of today? Do you think it was a strategically good decision or a strategically bad one?
So at the time of the decision, I was like, what? Why did we accept that? But then thinking about it, I thought maybe it's not such a bad idea to take sort of the calories out of the conflict. Because especially back in those days, it was as if the American administration, they got bigger and bigger and bigger every time anybody said anything against it. So the risk was, of course, that the tariffs would just be higher. And the European Union was arguing that tariffs, they are bad for yourself because, consumers will have to pay the tariffs. So we had ourselves delivered the argument that tariffs is a bad thing. So why just retaliate when the risk is that you get more tariffs? And you also risk escalating something. And it's like, we never asked for this. So I thought at the time, considering it further, that actually it was the right thing to do. That being said, if you look at the situation in Greenland, and we can talk more about that later if you want to, when that became a European question, and all of a sudden Europe said, no, this is our red line, actually the US administration backed down. And it became, a more sort of peaceful, maybe it's not the right word, but at least a discussion and not a threat to invade. So maybe every reaction has its time and its place, but it's not a given that you can always play it the same way.
Thank you. And staying on this discussion between the US and the EU, we see a lot of talking about the EU's sovereignty and strategic sovereignty especially. And the US has a lot of large firms. And in the Draghi report, there was a lot speaking, the Draghi report was speaking a lot about the fact that we need European champions. We need big firms that can compete with the US firms. During your time as commissioner, you were quite against merger of certain companies in the EU because it would impede competition. Do you still have the same view? And do you think that these decisions were correct to stop some mergers? And do you think it's okay to allow merging today in some strategic sectors and to allow the emergence of European champions?
So the poster case for this discussion was the prohibition of a merger between Siemens and
Yes.
Alstom. And it was on grounds of two specific markets. One was very high-speed trains. Second one was mainline signaling. The signaling that makes us all safe when we travel by train. Rest of the merger was fine. So the companies could not solve the competition issues. That would make it more expensive to buy signaling equipment, and every European provider was in the process of renewing their signaling in order to have better use of their rails, and could also not solve the competition issues connected with very high-speed trains. Also a very important market since everybody is trying to, increase the attractivity of traveling by train by making it faster. So it was a prohibition. And everybody said, no, what's going to happen? This is a big chance the Chinese will come and they will take over this market. So we revisited this market 5 years later, looked at it. So had Chinese companies overtaken this market? No, that was not the case. Instead, there were two companies who had filled order books all over the planet, so on the global market except for China. And those two companies, they were Siemens and Alstom. So instead of having one big company for the wrong reasons, actually, we had two European champions that are doing very well, both in the European market, but also in the global market. So I think one should be very careful. But the thing is that one also needs to look at the demand side of a market and not only at the supply side of the market. And I think it's really important to be really tough if you find that, for instance, in public procurement, that foreign companies are coming with different kind of state support, being able to underbid European companies who do not have that state support. Because the best way to grow a company is to have more customers, not to grow the company by merging more companies together, but dynamically by having more customers to demand your products.
So in your legacy as European Commissioner, there is also this foreign subsidy regulation. There was a lot of expectations around this regulation to really create a level playing field between European companies and foreign companies operating in the European market. Do you think it has delivered according to its expectations as of today?
I think it's important to review that because one thing we did not expect, and that was the number of cases that it brought, especially on the merger side, because there was a notification obligation if you had certain amount of foreign financing on board when two companies were merging. And we thought there would be relatively few, and there were many. And that's a good reason to see, okay, we have made a regulation. Maybe it's too finely knit, and we need, to broaden it a bit because we do not find the fish that we want to find, but we find a lot of smaller ones. So we're just being annoying to a lot of people instead of getting what we want. And I think that in itself is a good argument to look at the regulation to see if we got it right.
Okay, still on the regulation, I also want to ask you about maybe AI Act, DMA, etc. These are regulations that are where EU really projected a kind of regulatory power. At least this was what was considered by some commentators. But now we are seeing a kind of shift from the EU Commission with omnibus packages. There are talks maybe to amend the AI Act, which you were one of the main architects. So what do you think of these talks? Is this shift for competitiveness a kind of mistake? Do you think competitiveness could take precedence over protection of consumers, environments, also ethics when we talk about AI?
So I think that it's legitimate once in a while to stop, to pause, to see if things can be done in a simpler way. Because if you've been legislating over some period of time, there will be overlaps. Maybe there's been a political compromise. The wording is not exactly the same, even though you think that it covers the same area. I'm not a lawyer. I would think that it would be the same thing. Lawyers would say, no, 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 and that will cost you thousands of euros and it will take you a lot of time. Other pieces of legislation would not be made digitalizing ready. So there would be scope to simplify things in order to use much more digital ways of implementing it. So I think there's a lot of good reasons to go through legislation to say, well, this can be done in a much simpler way. And in every legislative process, there is a risk that you overdo it in order to get a compromise because somebody wants something else. Instead of finding the best of those two ideas, you take both of them on board because you're in a hurry. We need to get this going. So that, I think, is 100% legitimate. And I think there's also a perspective of doing so, of simplifying things, of weeding out, things that have been done twice or things that are a bit old school compared to where you are right now. It's a different thing to say, well, we don't like regulation anymore. Because actually what I think is that what the European democracy has done is what is normal. For decades, we have been working to make products safe. We've been working to make sure that when you compete, it's not at the cost of people's health or nature or whatever it may be. So that we also regulate a digital market and digital product is absolutely normal. We have always wanted markets to be open and contestable. We want digital markets to be that as well. Should be normal. Products should be safe to use. The Digital Services Act is about Digital Services Act being safe to use, both to democracy, but also to your mental health. Absolutely normal. Thinking about it, I think is kind of the rest of the world who's a bit reckless. and just continuing a full-scale experiment with digitization without any sort of the usual checks and balances that our democracy have always imposed on markets, on products, of how you can do your business.
Very interesting, yes. So we'll move now to more geopolitical questions. And first one is a question, especially young people ask a lot, that we see that the world now is moving towards regionalization. We see major blocs like US, China on top, EU trying to still remain relevant, but we also see powers like India and Brazil that are catching up really fast. So in the current polarization of the world and geopolitical situation, can the EU still be a superpower with its current political organization, or is federalization the only way that EU can become and still remain relevant?
I think for me, that's a difficult question because it really depends, what does it mean to be relevant? Because for me, being relevant is that you can deliver to your citizens. I think Europe is a social contract. You do your best with your talent, you educate yourself, you create a business, or you work hard in another business or in public administration. If you have a need, your kids need to go to school, somebody gets ill, you need infrastructure to get to your job, whatever it may be, well, then that is delivered to you. There's a contract. If you're weak or vulnerable or unemployed, society will be there for you. That, for me, is being relevant, to make sure that that social contract is actually upheld. And when I look at the efforts to destroy Europe, J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, flew to Hungary a few days before the election to tell the Hungarian voters, you need to vote for Orban. Days before the election, Donald Trump called to say to the Hungarian voters, we will provide you the economic means, vote for Orban, who has been doing his best to undermine the rule of law, media freedom, everything that is sort of the basics of what the European Union stands for. Putin has been doing his best in order to undermine numerous elections in Europe, in order to have people in charge who work against everything that is in the European Union. You see, President Xi and the Chinese, well, they are sort of trying to undermine the European markets and European businesses by flooding it with solar panels or EVs or whatever it may be. And that's made me think, oh my God, we must look very, very strong. Because otherwise, why all these efforts to try to break us? It seems to be such an insult to Trump, to Putin, to Xi, that we have a continent where the question of relevance is about being relevant to individual people, where the starting point of our democracies is the integrity and the respect of each and every one of us. And I think it would be so amazing if people realized the strength and then took that and used it in order to move our continent forward, both in fighting climate change, in being globally more competitive, in setting an agenda for some of the things that are important to us. So, change the game.
Yes, but however, building on this, and it's probably a topic close to your heart, Greenland was in the lights of US politics last year, and it was a major fighting point for EU and the US. And it is known that great powers in decline, they usually take reckless decisions. So with the rating points of Donald Trump, and probably he will also lose the midterm elections, do you think he might bring back Greenland into the discussion and even might do a move on Greenland diplomatically or militarily? And how do you think Europe should react in this case?
So what I understand is that the US president has not given up on the accession of another NATO partner territory to the US. And, we actually thought that the threat was real to take Greenland one way or another, as it was said. But the point was that for a long time, it was a question between Greenland and Denmark and the US. But then there was this NATO exercise because Arctic security is an increased priority. And the US president got very upset about this and said, everybody now have higher tariffs, or you have a higher tariff and you have a higher tariff. And that sort of Europeanized the question. And all of a sudden, it was all of Europe saying, no way. It's for all of us, it's a red line that no, you cannot take the territory of another NATO country. And that sort of made the US administration back down. And now they have, I think, quite civilized discussions about Arctic security. And I think that's the most interesting question. But of course, they will also discuss critical minerals, rare earth, what have you. And here, actually, Greenland also have a memorandum of understanding with the European Union about maybe eventually do joint ventures in order to do that. So it cooled down a bit. And with the US war on Iran being so unpopular, it doesn't seem to be the obvious thing to do to start even more hostile takeovers.
Okay, interesting. But staying on the EU power against its adversaries, we see that US, like in the case of Greenland or Iran, and Russia and China, they're using a lot of coercive action against their adversaries in order to fulfill their agenda, whatever that might be. However, EU has been a project that has, for most of the time, followed international law, and it's still following international law, but is playing in a context and environment that doesn't prioritize international law anymore. Do you think that EU should maybe step up a little bit from international law and take more coercive action against its adversaries in one form or another, maybe to replicate what they do, for example, in the cyber attacks, or should fund resistance movements in Belarus or other countries, or should apply anti-coercion mechanism against the US, so that EU also becomes, I don't want to say it, but more aggressive towards its adversaries, like they are acting towards the EU at some points?
I find it difficult because what we have been doing so far is that we have sort of turned the lights on for everybody to see what is happening. I think the EU services were the first to say, actually, we have these corrosive efforts by state actors, China and Russia. This is going on for people to know, to realize that there's a high risk that someone is trying to manipulate you. Someone is trying to make you do something that you would otherwise not have done. And we are in this sort of hybrid situation because you have, Russian interference in elections. You have, you've had attempts to assassinate people. You have the poisons and so on and so forth. But it's quite a jump to say, we'll do the same to you. We actually do have a legal basis when it comes to counter coercion. And the paradox is that it was made when Lithuania seemingly was the target for Chinese coercion. So not direct, but all of a sudden nothing really worked. So there is a legal basis actually to do something. What I think is important is to think even more long term, because the problem of the world order is what it was dysfunctional already before Trump won. The UN was not the trusted peacekeeper or deal maker that we would all look up to. Dull WTO didn't work because of lack of judges. And there was a lot of, I think, legitimate criticism from Brazil, from India, from South Africa, from a number of countries saying, listen, this world order that you're talking about, you created it after the Second World War and you created it with a very Western-centric perspective. But back then, it was more of a stable disorder. Then Trump happened, and it was like steroids in that pot. So we have a very unstable disorder. And I would very much like us to try to think forward. What is then the new global order? Because I think eventually everybody will realize that a world without an order doesn't serve anybody. Even the biggest country is small once in a while. Because we live in an integrated world, and even with the regionalization that I agree on, we're still so interconnected by global value streams and supply chains and what have you. So start to think about, what would we want to have? What should a new legitimate world order look like? I think that is a much more constructive approach than saying we want to be as coercive as you are.
I completely agree on what you say, but I think it supposes that some leaders some leaders are rational, that they follow some rationality rules, and it doesn't seem that it's the case with current president of the US, Russia, or president in China. So how can we answer to these leaders that are not rational?
So I agree with you that they seem very passionate. Putin with the great Russian empire that he seemingly wants to recreate. Trump, who wants to get into Mount Rushmore. Xi, who wants, Chinese influence all over the planet. And I think it's really important, if you are in a world of passion, that you realize your own passions. What is it that you're fighting for? What is important to you? And for me, I'm really passionate about this respect of the integrity of every individual. And I think that is the seed that can make another world order grow and bloom. So I don't think that you have to be sort of rational, in inverted commas, to try to push for that. Actually, I think you need to be really, really passionate about it. And you need to know that, because otherwise, in a world of passions, you really need to know your own.
Thank you, Margrethe Vestager, for these responses. In the last part of our podcast, we want to touch more about your political career. We know that you stepped aside or stepped back from official political roles 2 years ago. We want, so now you're chairing the board of the Danish Technical University, which is the best university in Denmark and one of the best institutions in Europe. You're also a world leader fellow at the Blavatnik School of Government. So what do you enjoy the most, since you're not in these official meetings in speaking about geopolitics? But also, do you miss sometimes some parts or some aspects of your former jobs?
So when I was very young, I read an article by Václav Havel about how power corrupted him. So, you become more and more important, and all of a sudden, and you have to go to the dentist, and you don't have time to wait. So you want to just waltz through the waiting room, and later you think, well, why wait till he open? He can open for me. And it made a huge impression on me, and I thought, this is not going to happen to me. So I always try to remind myself that power is something that you have for lending in order to solve something, a task. It's not about you. It's not because I'm a great person. It's because I have something to do that where power is needed. And actually, it has worked so that I have no phantom pain when I have given it back to my successor in the European Commission. But what I miss is the people. It's an amazing place. You have civil servants from 27 nations, and then some Norwegians as well. And they are clever, and they are dedicated, and they're on a mission. So I enjoyed the flexibility when working in the commission, my day was basically chopped up in 30-minute intervals, and I would go from one thing to the other. So, of course, I enjoy the flexibility because I have these 2 years of cooling where there are strict limits as to what I can do because of the job I had previously. But it's so attractive to be part of a team, to have colleagues, because everybody can do more. What is it that they say? If you want to go fast, go alone.
Yeah.
If you-
Together we go further.
Yes, you go much further when you're part of a team. I really miss the people.
Okay.
That's very nice. So maybe you have some advices, because our audience is mainly form of young students, people in formation that are striving to have a good career and impact on Earth. And maybe you can give our audience some advices for some early career academics, students, and professionals.
I think it's very difficult to give advice because we are all different, but I can say what I've done myself that has served me well. And one of the things was that I never planned.
Okay.
Because for me, sort of planning works like putting on blinders. And you put blinders on a horse in order for it not to be disturbed. And I think it's really important to be disturbed. Because sometimes the next interesting things, you see that out of the corner of your eye. And then you realize, oh my God, that's the best thing ever. So I have had this sort of, oh, there's something interesting. Let me go figure if I can do that. And I've been very young in taking up positions. I was the Minister of Education and Ecclesiastical Affairs when I was 29. Today, maybe I think I was too young for that, but I didn't know. So I just did it. And I have come to think of this not planning, but looking for the next interesting thing to do as more exploration than career building. And I heard a podcast with Jane Fonda recently. She's very old right now, but she's amazing. And she said, when people say to you that you're over the hill, then remember that you're the one with new horizons. That maybe life is more like exploring a landscape rather than getting from A to B. And in that landscape, sometimes you have to go slow because it's a difficult place. Sometimes you can jump on a train and it will take you really fast in a surprising direction. And that for me, makes a lot of sense because the world is amazing. And I think one will regret to limit oneself to a plan that one has made when you didn't know a lot about all the opportunities that are open.
Are there new opportunities that you want to explore today?
So most people, they ask me if I want to go and sit on that board or that board or that board. But I'm trying to figure out because I'm educated as an economist, but that was in the last millennium. And then I have worked 25 years in politics in different roles. So what are the competences that gives me? And what will that offer? Because I'm in my late 50s. Maybe I have 15 years more. So it will be interesting to see. But definitely it will be a combination of different things.
Very nice to hear that. And with this positive note, we close our podcast. And thank you, Margaret, for being with us here. This is the end of the episode for Oxford Policy Pod with Margrethe Vestager, former Vice President of the European Commissioner and one of the most famous politicians in Europe. Thank you very much, and see you to the next episode. Have a nice day.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank